I'm joined on the line by retired four-star Navy admiral and former Supreme Allied Commander of NATO, James Stavridis. Welcome.
Great to be with you, Ann.
Delighted to have you. I'm also joined by Kendra McCrary, president of the Women's Board of Wolfson Children's Hospital. She's here in studio to tell us more about his appearance Monday in Jacksonville. Hey, Kendra.
Good morning.
Admiral, there is so much going on globally, geopolitically. How do you get your bearings? How do you even decide what to focus on?
Three things constantly feed the machine of how I'm thinking about the world. One is my own experiences, having spent almost 40 years in the military, and then, as you mentioned, 4 years as Supreme Allied Commander of NATO. Add to that 5 years as the dean of a top graduate school of international relations, the Fletcher School of Law and Diplomacy up at Tufts. So as you would imagine, I bring quite a bit of personal experience. Point two is I maintain all my security clearances. I'm a fellow at Johns Hopkins Applied Physics Lab in the Baltimore area. And as a result, I see a lot of high-end information. Now, I'm never going to reveal classified information, but it informs my analysis. And then third and finally, and this is something everyone can do, is simply stay up on events by engaging and spending time on reputable media outlets. I particularly enjoy Washington Post, New York Times, listen a lot to NPR, PBS, and also I read The Economist magazine, basically cover to cover every week. That's good one-stop shopping for folks that want to know the world. So there's a kind of a snapshot.
From just a practical standpoint, though, I mean, we're talking about, Ukraine, Russia, the war there, dispute between China and Taiwan, the war that's happening between Israel and Hamas right now. U.S. is retaliating against Iran and Jordan. I mean, literally, what is your focus?
I am very focused on three principal lines of current activity. One is the Middle East, and you mentioned a couple of the points. The way the Houthi rebels backed by Iran are attacking global shipping, that could have real manifestations on global supply chains. Alongside that, as you mentioned, the war between Hamas and Israel in the Gaza Strip. But is that going to explode into a wider conflict? Where's the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia in all of this? So one principal line of analysis for me is the Middle East. Number two is Ukraine and Russia, because that will impact NATO, our alliances, really the cause of freedom overall. And then third, U.S.-China relations, because these are the two largest economies in the world. You've got to pay attention to how that interaction is unspooling, particularly around the status of the island of Taiwan. So, yeah, it's a lot to cover. You've got to prioritize. You've got to stay focused. And for me, those are the top three things I'm thinking about at the moment.
It's still a lot. As my dad likes to say that, a stove only has so many front burners. I mean, you've got three things cooking there, and they're all massively consequential.
Yeah, almost every stove has at least four burners, and if I were going to add one more burner, it would be cybersecurity, and artificial intelligence, which kind of cuts across all of those other areas. These are all things I'll be talking about when I have a chance to do this wonderful talk in my hometown, by the way. I'm a native Floridian. My wife was actually born in Jacksonville at Baptist Hospital, so to be able to come and talk to my hometown audience about these big topics is a wonderful opportunity for me.
Well, that's terrific. Kendra, that's a nice segue. So tell us about the Florida Forum Speaker Series that the Admiral is going to be a part of on Monday. What is the event? How can people attend?
The Florida Forum is in its 31st year. It's a speaker series hosted to benefit the Women's Board of Wolfson Children's Hospital. So we're raising money for the local children's hospital. People can attend by going to thefloridaforum.com, and tickets are available there. They start at $50 and go up. We'd love to have more people attend. We've been doing this for 31 years, and our goal is to bring world leaders in to engage our local community and stir thought-provoking conversations. And we have every expectation that Admiral Stavridis will be right up there with the best of them. He's got a lot of information to share with us, and he is so relevant for our world today. We're really excited to be hosting him on Monday.
My goodness, so much to learn from him. I wonder, Admiral, how do you regard, in terms of just humanity, if you're not trying to look through specifically a United States, America lens, is there a group of people or a region that you see as like the most imperiled?
I think in the tactical moment, if you are here on a Wednesday morning at 9:40, you have to be mindful of the 2.2 million people trapped in Gaza. This is a tiny area on the southwest corner of Israel. It's 20 miles by 6 miles, so it's a very small area, and 2.2 million people are effectively in the middle of a war zone between Israelis, the Israeli Defense Forces, and a terrorist organization, Hamas. So I think of particularly the children. Half of these 2.2 million people are under the age of 18, and they're lacking food, water, medical care. It is a brutal situation. I've been in war zones throughout my long career in the Navy. I know what this is like, and it's hard to think of innocent civilians caught in the middle. I think that's a particularly terrible moment globally.
And yet the U.S. has not supported a ceasefire or pressuring Israel to have a ceasefire.
I think the United States has been, as is traditional, very supportive of Israel. And certainly publicly, the United States has not put enormous pressure on Israel yet. My own sense is there is an awful lot of pressure that is going on off stage, back behind the glaring lights of publicity. That's why Secretary of State Tony Blinken, a good friend of mine, has been in Jerusalem 5 times in the last 3 months. Secretary of Defense Lloyd Austin has traveled to the region, National Security Advisor Jake Sullivan. I think there is an enormous amount of pressure behind the scenes. And oh, by the way, just 10 days ago, President Biden categorized the Israeli level of military activity in Gaza as, quote, over the top, unquote. So I think that pressure is building, and certainly the United States has leverage in this situation as a provider of military equipment and financial support to Israel. Personal opinion, I think it's time we stepped in and pushed harder because in the long run, that's the right thing for Israel.
It's, you have obviously a background in the military, NATO, the Navy. I wonder, though, if you think that the world's greatest, like, geostrategic threats are, in fact, humanity's greatest challenges. Things like climate change seem to be perhaps an overarching greater danger, perhaps, than any of these, disputes between nations.
I agree with you, and let me frame it this way. 5 years ago, I sat down and thought, okay, I want to write 3 books that highlight the great challenges we are going to face in the 21st century. The first one was set in the year 2034, and that's the title. It's 2034, A Novel of the Next World War. It's about the U.S. and China stumbling into a military conflict. That's the kind of traditional view of threat. But the next novel, the one that actually comes out in a month, is called 2054, set in the year 2054, and it deals with cybersecurity, artificial intelligence. I think the challenges that are emerging from that are going to be profound for the world. And the third novel, this is your point, is called 2084, a novel of climate and war. And if we don't make the adjustments now, we are going to induce geopolitical conflict that will come home to roost probably in the 50 to 70-year future. So all of those things ought to concern us. I think climate is a profoundly enormous challenge for the planet, yes.
And it can play, too, into military
Of course.
situations. I mean, not only can catastrophic weather impact, military operations, but global migration itself, seems to be a threat to entire continents in terms of their political and financial stability.
Absolutely. Let me add to your excellent points. Adding to that are sea level rising as ice melts in the polar regions, sea levels rise, and coastal cities will become swamped. That'll contribute to migration, to economic catastrophe. You already mentioned the necessity of militaries responding to these massive megastorms, these wildfires that are spreading. And then third and finally, as the ice melts in the polar regions, geopolitical competition will heat up because those resources, oil, gas, shipping lanes, all become wide open. And what nations border the Arctic? I'll tell you, it's Russia on one side of that Arctic porch, and on the other side are 5 NATO nations. So we've got a built-in thunderdome at the top of the world. All of that will create real instability that could be avoided if we could reduce climate challenges earlier in this century.
That's obviously a huge topic. I want to just ask you about what's in the news right now, the death of Alexi Navalny, and my curiosity if you think that that's going to have any bearing on, for instance, the right's recent embrace of Vladimir Putin and Russia, whether his death and the circumstances, of his life and his advocacy have any bearing on the debate that's happening here in terms of funding Ukraine and, what side we're on, so to speak.
Yeah, let's start with Alexander Navalny, who is an enormous hero. He literally gave his life in the cause of freedom and democracy. He knew walking back into Russia was tantamount to a death sentence for him, and that's exactly what occurred. My heart goes out to his wife, Julia, and I am always hopeful that his spirit will continue somehow over time to help the people of Russia throw off this monstrous dictator, Vladimir Putin. To your point, will it impact here in the United States, particularly on the far right world, which has spent a fair amount of time this year pushing back on aid to Ukraine, which obviously is beneficial to Vladimir Putin? Unfortunately, I don't think so. I don't think it will move the needle. It should. It ought to be an object lesson placed directly in front of our vision of how terrible Vladimir Putin is and what his future, Vladimir Putin's future, is for Ukraine if he conquers it. And by the way, he won't stop at Ukraine. He will then push on into Moldova, potentially into NATO countries like Estonia, Latvia, Lithuania. He is a dangerous, single-minded, focused killer. And the death of Navalny ought to move the debate here, but sadly, I don't think it will.
Well, retired Admiral James Stavridis, he will be at the Florida Forum Speaker Series on Monday, February 26th. The program begins at 7. Thank you so much for being here, Admiral.
Thanks a lot. And last thought, the first half of the lecture, we'll talk about all the things we talked about. The second half will be, okay, what should we do about it? How can we avoid these challenges? Thanks for having me on.
Thanks so much. And Kendra, thanks for being here.
Thank you.
We'll be back in just a minute.